Most people think speed is the answer. When something happens, they believe the fastest response is the strongest response. Act quickly, decide immediately, move on. But clarity does not come from speed. Clarity comes from pause. The first mistake we make in moments of pressure is assuming that action creates control. It doesn't. Understanding creates control. And understanding requires space. That is why the first 30 minutes matter more than the next 30 days. When something unexpected hits your life, your brain doesn't look for truth. It looks for safety. It looks for familiar patterns. It looks for shortcuts. And those shortcuts are built from past fears, old habits, and emotional reflexes. If you act immediately, you're not acting as the person you want to be. You're acting as the person you've always been trained to be. Clarity before action is about interrupting that pattern. Imagine two people facing the same setback. One reacts instantly. The other pauses. The event is identical. The outcome is not. The difference isn't intelligence. It isn't talent. It's intention. One lets the moment decide the meaning. The other decides the meaning themselves. Because meaning always comes before behavior. If you believe the setback means you're not good enough, your actions will reflect insecurity. If you believe it means you're learning, your actions will reflect growth. Same event, different meaning, different future. Those first 30 minutes are when the meaning is written. Most regret in life doesn't come from what we didn't do. It comes from what we did too quickly. Words spoken in anger, decisions made in fear, commitments broken in frustration. We look back and say, that wasn't me, but it was you without clarity. Clarity doesn't mean certainty. It means alignment. It means your response matches your values, not just your emotions, and values don't shout. Emotions do. That's why clarity is quiet. It doesn't rush. It listens. It asks uncomfortable questions instead of giving easy answers. In those 30 minutes, you're not trying to feel better. You're trying to see better. What am I actually reacting to? Is this about the present, or am I carrying something from the past? What would the best version of me do next? These questions slow you down just enough to move you forward in the right direction. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many people don't want clarity. They want relief. Relief is fast. Clarity is honest. Relief lets you avoid responsibility. Clarity forces you to face it. Blame feels good in the moment. Ownership feels heavy at first. But ownership is the only thing that gives you power. And power begins with clarity. When you act without clarity, you give your power away to circumstances, to other people, to moods. When you pause, you take it back. This is not about perfection. You will still make mistakes. You will still feel overwhelmed. The difference is that your mistakes won't define you. They'll teach you because they were made consciously, not impulsively. Think about leadership. Real leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating enough clarity so others feel safe moving forward. And before you can lead anyone else, you must be able to lead yourself in moments of uncertainty. The 30 minutes is a leadership practice. It's you saying, I don't need to prove anything right now. I need to understand. Understanding changes tone. It changes posture. It changes the energy you bring into the next conversation, the next decision, the next step. People don't respond to what you say as much as they respond to where you're coming from. Clarity changes where you're coming from. And here's where it gets powerful. When you consistently choose clarity before action, your identity starts to shift. You stop seeing yourself as reactive. You start seeing yourself as intentional. You trust yourself more because you know you won't abandon your values under pressure. Trust is built in these moments, not when things go according to plan, but when they don't. The world will always move fast. Problems will keep showing up unannounced. You will never control the timing of challenges, but you can always control the timing of your response. 30 minutes is not a delay, it's an investment. An investment in better decisions, an investment in stronger relationships, an investment in a future version of you who doesn't live with regret. Clarity before action is not passive, it's disciplined. It takes courage to pause when everything inside you wants to react. It takes strength to wait when your ego wants to defend itself. But that strength pays off because once clarity arrives, action becomes simple, not easy. Simple. You know what to do because you know who you are. And when you act from that place, the results may not always be perfect, but they will always be aligned. And alignment, over time, beats intensity every single time. That is why the first 30 minutes are sacred, not because nothing happens, but because everything important begins there. Every action you take has a source, not logic, not intelligence, emotion. Long before you explain your behavior, justify your choices, or create a story that sounds reasonable, something else has already decided for you. You felt something, and what you feel in the first 30 minutes after a trigger quietly takes control of everything that follows. We like to believe we are rational people. We say we think things through. We say we weigh options. But neuroscience and experience tell us something very different. We don't make decisions and then feel. We feel first, and then we find reasons to support what we've already decided to do. That's why emotion is so dangerous when left unchecked. Not because emotion is bad, but because emotion is fast, and speed without direction is chaos. When something unexpected happens, the emotion arrives instantly. Anger, fear, embarrassment, disappointment, pride, excitement. And in that moment, your body reacts before your mind has even caught up. Heart rate changes, breathing shifts, muscles tighten. Your system is preparing for action. The problem is not that emotion shows up. The problem is when emotion is allowed to drive, because emotion does not care about long-term consequences. Emotion cares about now. It wants comfort. It wants validation. It wants to be heard. And if you obey it immediately, it will take you somewhere familiar, not somewhere better. Think about how many decisions in your life started with, I just felt like it. I felt angry, so I said it. I felt tired, so I quit. I felt insecure, so I avoided it. I felt excited, so I ignored the risk. None of those feelings were wrong. But letting them take the wheel often was. The first 30 minutes are not about eliminating emotion. They are about letting emotion speak without letting it command. Because emotions are messengers, not managers. Anger might be telling you a boundary was crossed. Fear might be telling you something matters. Disappointment might be telling you expectations were unclear. But when you confuse the message with the instruction, you act too soon. Emotion says, react now. Wisdom says, understand first. That gap between the two is where the rule lives. Most damage in relationships happens because emotions are expressed without translation. Words spoken from raw emotion are rarely precise, they're exaggerated, they're defensive, they're loaded. And once they're out, you can't pull them back. Apologies later don't erase impact. The same is true in leadership, in work, in life. A leader who reacts emotionally creates uncertainty. A parent who reacts emotionally creates fear. A partner who reacts emotionally creates distance. Not because they feel too much, but because they pause too little. The 30 minutes give your emotions time to settle into informa. Tion. When the intensity fades, insight appears. You start to see what you're really upset about. You separate what hurt your ego from what violated your values. You realize what deserves a response and what deserves to be let go. This is emotional maturity. Not the absence of emotion, but the ability to sit with it without being controlled by it. And this is where most people struggle. Sitting with discomfort feels like weakness. Doing nothing feels like losing. But restraint is not surrender, it's strategy. When you delay action, emotion loses its urgency. It doesn't disappear, but it softens. And when it softens, you regain choice. Choice is everything. Without choice, you're predictable. People can trigger you, manipulate. You push your buttons because they know you'll respond the same way every time. With choice, you're grounded, unshakable, free. The people we admire most aren't the ones who never feel deeply. They're the ones who feel deeply and still choose wisely. They don't explode under pressure. They don't collapse under criticism. They don't rush to defend themselves. They listen, they observe, they respond. And that response carries weight because it wasn't rushed. There's another truth we don't talk about enough. Emotional reactions feel honest, but they're often incomplete. They represent a single moment, not the full picture. If you act on them immediately, you lock yourself into a version of the story that may not be true. 30 minutes later, perspective changes, context appears, assumptions weaken, options expand, and suddenly what felt urgent feels manageable. This doesn't mean you ignore your emotions, it means you respect them, enough not to misuse them. You give them time to speak clearly instead of shouting through your behavior. Over time, something powerful happens. When you consistently pause before acting, your emotional baseline changes. You become less reactive, not because life is calmer, but because you are. You trust yourself to handle things without spiraling. You stop fearing emotions because you know they won't control you. That confidence is quiet, but it's strong. People begin to feel safe around you. Conversations become more honest. Conflicts become more productive because they know you won't react impulsively. You'll listen. You'll respond with intention. That is influence. The first 30 minutes are not about suppressing your humanity. They are about protecting it. They prevent temporary feelings from creating permanent consequences. They turn emotional energy into purposeful action. Because when emotion drives behavior unchecked, life feels chaotic. But when emotion is acknowledged and guided, it becomes fuel. Fuel for courage, fuel for growth, fuel for decisions you don't regret later. You don't need to feel less. You need to pause more. And if you can do that for just 30 minutes, you don't lose your edge. You gain control. And control, not intensity, is what creates lasting impact. Most people are waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel inspired, waiting for motivation to arrive like a signal that says, now is the time. And when that feeling doesn't come, they assume something is wrong with them. But nothing is wrong with them. They're just relying on the wrong thing. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is intentional. And when it comes to controlling the first 30 minutes, discipline will always outperform motivation. Motivation is exciting, but it's unreliable. It shows up when conditions are perfect and disappears the moment things get uncomfortable. Discipline doesn't care how you feel, it cares who you decided to be. That's why discipline is quieter, less dramatic, less visible, but infinitely more powerful. In the first 30 minutes after a trigger, motivation is at its weakest. You don't feel inspired to stay calm when you're angry. You don't feel motivated to think clearly when you're scared. You don't feel driven to act wisely when your ego feels threatened. That's when discipline steps in. Discipline says, I don't need to feel good to do the right thing. Discipline says, this pause is non-negotiable. Discipline says, I've practiced this before the moment arrived because discipline is built in advance. You don't decide to be disciplined during the crisis. You decide long before it. You decide that no matter what happens, the first 30 minutes belong to clarity, not chaos. This is where many people misunderstand discipline. They think it's about force, about pushing harder, about denying yourself. But real discipline is not harsh. It's protective. It exists to guard you from becoming someone you don't respect. Think about the habits you regret most. They rarely started with logic. They started with emotion and a lack of structure. Discipline provides that structure when emotions are loud, and structure creates freedom. When you know exactly what you will do in the first 30 minutes, you remove negotiation. You don't debate with yourself. You don't justify bad behavior. You don't drift into old patterns. You follow the system you already chose. That's how discipline works. It reduces decision fatigue. It turns good behavior into default behavior. Motivation asks, do I feel like doing this? Discipline asks, what did I commit to? And commitment is stronger than feeling. People who appear calm under pressure are not magically composed. They're prepared. They've rehearsed restraint. They've practiced pause. They've trained themselves to wait even when everything inside them wants to move. That training doesn't happen in big moments. It happens in small ones, in choosing not to react to minor frustrations, in delaying small impulses, in honoring tiny pauses consistently. That's why the 30 minutes rule compounds. Every time you follow it, you strengthen self-trust. You prove to yourself that you can handle discomfort without collapsing or exploding. And self-trust is the foundation of company. Confidence. Confidence doesn't come from winning every battle. It comes from knowing you won't abandon yourself when things get hard. Discipline also changes how you view failure. When you slip, you don't spiral into shame, you reset. You return to the rule, because discipline isn't about being perfect. It's about being consistent. Consistency beats intensity every time. A motivated response might feel powerful in the moment. A disciplined response creates stability over time, and stability is what allows growth to happen. Think about relationships. The strongest relationships aren't built on passionate reactions. They're built on reliable responses, knowing that the other person won't overreact, won't disappear, won't escalate every disagreement, that reliability comes from discipline. Think about leadership. People don't follow leaders who are emotionally unpredictable. They follow leaders who are steady, calm, grounded, leaders who don't let a bad moment dictate a bad direction. That steadiness is not natural. It's practiced. The 30 minutes are your practice field. In those moments, discipline reminds you that you don't need to prove anything. You don't need to win the argument. You don't need to defend your ego immediately. You need to protect the long-term outcome. Short-term relief is tempting. Long-term respect is earned. And discipline always chooses long-term. Over time, something remarkable happens. You stop craving motivation. You stop waiting for the PE. Affect mood. You trust your systems more than your feelings, and life becomes less dramatic but more effective. You still feel deeply. You still care. You're just no longer controlled by emotional spikes. You move with intention, not impulse. This doesn't make life boring. It makes it meaningful, because meaning comes from progress, and progress comes from showing up even when motivation doesn't. The first 30 minutes are not about doing more, they're about doing less on purpose, less talking, less reacting, less assuming. And that restraint opens the door to better action later. Discipline doesn't ask you to be emotionless, it asks you to be responsible. Responsible for the impact of your behavior, responsible for the example you set, responsible for the person you are becoming. And becoming is the key word. Every disciplined pause is a vote for your future self, a self who is calmer, stronger, more trustworthy, a self who doesn't live in regret, replaying moments that could have gone differently. You don't need to master your entire life. You just need to master the first 30 minutes, again and again. Motivation will come and go. Discipline stays. And when discipline becomes your habit, control becomes your identity. Most people believe control means power over circumstances, over people, over outcomes. They think if they can just manage everything around them, they'll finally feel calm. But that's not control. That's exhaustion. Real control is quieter. It's internal. It's the ability to choose your response even when everything around you feels unstable. And that kind of control begins in the first 30 minutes. When something unexpected happens, the world doesn't actually change that much. What changes is your interpretation of it, the meaning you attach, the story you tell yourself. And that story determines whether you feel powerless or capable. Reclaiming control is not about fixing the situation immediately. It's about refusing to let the situation decide who you are in that moment. Most people give away control without realizing it. They hand it to other people's words, to sudden setbacks, to unexpected criticism. Someone presses a button and they react automatically. Raised voice, defensiveness, withdrawal, over-explanation, silence. In those moments, you are not choosing, you are complying. The 30 minutes rule is a refusal to comply with chaos. It's you saying, this does not get to dictate my behavior. That pause interrupts the automatic loop. Stimulus, reaction, regret. Without the pause, the loop runs itself. With the pause, you step outside it. And once you're outside it, you can change it. Control starts with awareness. In the first few minutes, after a trigger, your thoughts are often distorted. You assume intent. You exaggerate impact. You personalize everything. That's not reality. That's your nervous system talking. So instead of asking, how do I fix this? You ask, what's actually happening inside me, at now? That question shifts power back to you. Because you may not control what happened, but you always control how you process it. Reclaiming control also means accepting discomfort. Most impulsive reactions are attempts to escape discomfort quickly, to shut it down, to push it away. But discomfort isn't dangerous. Avoidance is. When you avoid discomfort, you avoid growth. When you sit with it, you build resilience. The first 30 minutes train you to stay present with discomfort without acting destructively. You feel the tension, the frustration, the uncertainty, and you don't collapse, you don't explode, you stay. Staying is strength. And every time you stay, your nervous system learns that you are safe, that you don't need to panic, that you can handle this. Over time, that rewiring changes how you experience stress altogether. Control is not about suppressing emotion. It's about regulating it. Regulation allows you to respond instead of react. And response is where dignity lives. Think about the moments you admire in others, the calm answer, the measured tone, the thoughtful pause before speaking. Those moments feel powerful because they are rare, and they are rare because they require effort. Effort that most people are unwilling to invest in the heat of the moment. But that effort pays dividends. When you reclaim control in the first 30 minutes, you protect your credibility. People listen more closely to someone who doesn't rush to speak. They trust someone who doesn't overreact. They respect someone who remains composed under pressure. That respect is not demanded. It's earned through consistency. And consistency is built in these small, unglamorous pauses. There's also a deeper layer to control that we often ignore. Control is not about being right, it's about being effective. You can win an argument and lose the relationship. You can prove your point and damage your reputation. You can react honestly and still cause harm. The 30 minutes remind you to ask a better question. What outcome do I actually want? Because the first answer is usually emotional. The second answer is usually strategic. And strategy requires patience. Reclaiming control also means choosing what not to engage with. Not every comment deserves a response. Not every provocation deserves your energy. Not every problem needs to be solved immediately. Silence, when chosen intentionally, is not avoidance. It's leadership. In a world addicted to instant reactions, restraint stands out. It signals confidence. It signals self-assurance. It signals that you are not dependent on external validation to feel stable. And that stability becomes your anchor. Over time, you begin to notice something shift. Situations that once triggered you lose their power, not because people changed, but because you did. You no longer feel the need to defend yourself constantly. You no longer feel the urge to control every outcome. You focus on what actually matters. The first 30 minutes teach you that control is not something you fight for. It's something you practice. And practice changes identity. You stop seeing yourself as reactive. You stop labeling yourself as emotional, impatient, or impulsive. You start seeing yourself as grounded, intentional, capable. That identity becomes self-fulfilling. The more control you reclaim internally, the less chaos you experience externally, because chaos thrives on reaction. When reaction disappears, chaos has nowhere to land. Life will always throw challenges at you. That won't change. But the version of you who meets those challenges can change dramatically. Not through force, not through suppression, but through a simple, disciplined pause. 30 minutes to breathe, 30 minutes to observe, 30 minutes to choose. That is not losing control. That is claiming it. People often overestimate what can be done in a single day and underestimate what can be built over time. They look for transformation in dramatic breakthroughs, in bold declarations, in one defining moment that changes everything. But real change rarely announces itself that way. Real change is quiet, it accumulates, and the most powerful form of accumulation begins with something almost invisible: repeated control of the first 30 minutes. On its own, one disciplined pause doesn't feel life-changing. It feels small, almost insignificant. But small things, when repeated, don't stay small. They compound. And compounding is how ordinary behavior creates extraordinary outcomes. Every time you honor the 30 minutes rule, you are making a deposit into your character, a deposit into your reputation, a deposit into your future. Most people don't realize they are compounding too, just in the opposite direction. Every impulsive reaction reinforces a habit. Every emotional outburst makes the next one easier. Every rushed decision trains the brain to expect urgency instead of thoughtfulness. Habits don't ask for permission. They grow in the direction you feed them. The first 30 minutes decide what gets fed. When you pause consistently, you are teaching your brain a new pattern. You are saying, we don't panic here. We don't rush here. We don't sacrifice long-term outcomes for short-term relief. At first, it feels unnatural, even uncomfortable, because you are interrupting years of conditioning, but repetition rewires instinct. What once required effort becomes automatic. What once felt forced becomes identity. This is how compounding works. Not in leaps, but in layers. Think about trust. Trust is not built by grand gestures. It's built by predictability, by knowing how someone will respond under pressure. When people see you consistently measured instead of reactive, calm instead of chaotic, thoughtful instead of impulsive, something shifts. They trust you, not because you're perfect, but because you're reliable, and reliability compounds. One calm response makes the next one easier. One thoughtful decision reinforces the expectation. Over time, your presence alone creates stability in a room. That's influence. The same is true internally. Self-trust compounds faster than anything else. Every time you pause instead of react, you prove to yourself that you can be trusted with responsibility. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop fearing your own emotions. You know that even when things go wrong, you will handle it with intention. That confidence is not loud. It doesn't need validation. It's grounded. And grounded people make better decisions. Compounding also changes how setbacks affect you. When you've built a history of controlled responses, one mistake doesn't define you. You correct it, you learn, you move forward, because your identity is no longer tied to isolated moments, but to patterns. Patterns are powerful. They shape how others treat you. They shape what opportunities come your way. People give responsibility to those who don't crumble under pressure. They listen to those who don't overreact. They follow those who stay steady when things get uncertain. That steadiness didn't appear overnight. It was built 30 minutes at a time. There is also a deeper compounding effect that's easy to miss. When you stop reacting impulsively, you create space for better thinking. Better thinking leads to better questions. Better questions lead to better strategies. Over time, your entire approach to life becomes more deliberate. You don't just respond better, you anticipate better. You begin to see patterns before they become problems. You address issues early instead of waiting for them to explode. That foresight is not talent, it's the result of slowing down consistently. Most people live in reaction mode so long that they mistake urgency for importance. The 30 minutes rule breaks that illusion. It teaches you that not everything urgent deserves your immediate attention, and not everything important arrives loudly. By repeatedly choosing restraint, you gain leverage. Leverage over your time, your energy, your focus, and leverage, compounded over months and years, creates freedom. Freedom from regret. Freedom from emotional whiplash. Freedom from living at the mercy of every external event. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means it becomes intentional. And intention is what separates those who drift from those who build. The compounding effect also reshapes how you view success. Success stops being about quick wins and starts being about sustained alignment. You care less about looking right in the moment and more about being right over time. That shift changes everything. Because when alignment becomes the goal, patience becomes a strength. You are willing to wait, willing to pause, willing to think. And those willing moments add up to a life that feels stable, purposeful, and earned. Most people look for motivation to stay consistent. But consistency doesn't come from feeling inspired. It comes from systems that remove impulse. The 30 minutes rule is one of those systems. Simple, repeatable, powerful. It doesn't demand perfection. It only asks for commitment. And commitment, practiced daily, compounds faster than talent. Years from now, you won't remember every challenge you faced, but you will live with the results of how you handled them, the relationships you preserve, the opportunities you didn't destroy, the respect you earned quietly. Those outcomes won't be traced back to one dramatic decision. They will be traced back to hundreds of small uses that most people never noticed. That is the hidden power of the 30 minutes rule. Not that it changes a moment, but that over time it changes everything. In the end, the 30 minutes rule is not about time, it's about responsibility. Responsibility for your reactions. Responsibility for your decisions, responsibility for the person you choose to be when life doesn't go as planned. You will never control every event. You will never eliminate stress, conflict, or uncertainty, but you will always have one powerful choice, whether you respond on impulse or with intention. That choice lives in the first 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes are where character is revealed, not when things are easy, but when emotions are loud and pressure is high. It's where you decide whether a moment will pass or leave a permanent mark, whether a feeling will fade or turn into regret. Most people give away that moment without thinking. They react because it feels natural. They speak because silence feels uncomfortable. They act because waiting feels like weakness. But strength has never been about speed. Strength has always been about control. When you choose to pause, you are not delaying progress. You are protecting it. You are giving yourself the chance to align your actions with your values instead of your emotions. And that alignment, repeated over time, becomes integrity. The 30 minutes rule teaches you that calm is not the absence of emotion. It's the presence of choice. It reminds you that emotions are temporary, but consequences are not. Words cannot be unsaid, actions cannot be undone, but pauses can prevent damage before it happens. Over time, this simple practice reshapes your life. You become someone people trust under pressure, someone who listens before speaking, someone who responds with purpose instead of impulse. And just as importantly, you become someone you trust. That self-trust changes how you walk into every situation. You stop fearing challenges because you know you won't lose yourself in them. You stop reacting to every provocation because you know not everything deserves your energy. The world will continue to move fast. Opinions will be loud. Problems will arrive without warning, but you don't have to move at the same speed. You can choose to be deliberate in a reactive world. If you remember nothing else, remember this. You don't need to master your whole life today. You just need to master the first 30 minutes of the next moment that tests you. Do that consistently and the rest will follow. Because when you control the first 30 minutes, you don't just change outcomes. You change identity. And when identity changes, behavior follows naturally. That is the quiet power of the 30 minutes rule.